As most of you know who have gotten to know me here at the center, from speaking occasionally, you know that I'm not someone who spends an awful lot of time in the biblical side of things. Um, I love the biblical side of things. I was raised in them, but the whole world of spirituality and theology just fascinates me, and I go where I think Ernest Holmes says we claim the truth wherever we find it, and I run around trying to claim the truth at the big smorgasbord of spirituality, the big buffet. I love that, the breakfast buffet of spirituality. But today I want to go into the biblical thing just for a moment. And for any of you who have ever struggled with the biblical side of the street, I'm going to go into it from the standpoint of metaphor, metaphysical meaning, metaphor, a deeper idea of what it is. And I'm going to be taking not Joseph Campbell. I'm going to be taking Carl Jung with me. And so feel safe. We're taking Carl Jung, okay, with the archetypes. In the biblical book of Matthew, chapter 19, there's an entire narrative that goes on there. And most of us know that passage from where it says, allow the little children to come unto me. That's what we all know, and we like that. That's warm and fuzzy. But if you ever read the entire piece, the entire chapter 19, it's one of those times when Jesus is really being this teacher. And in our philosophy, we don't see Jesus as a savior. We don't see him as the exception. We see him as an example, as a great teacher, someone whose wisdom transcended who he was in some way, shape, or form. And he was being confronted with a whole bunch of people who wanted to get into a whole bunch of esoteric stuff. And if you read the whole chapter, wow, I mean, it just runs the full gamut. What is the relationship between men and women? What is the relationship with God? It just goes through, it just comes on and on and on. And Jesus is showing up with these words of wisdoms, and it starts off with what they call the Pharisees. And so these are spiritual academics, I guess, of the time, and they're really pelting him. Who do you think you are? And they're asking all these questions, and he's dealing with it. And then the guys he hangs out with, the 12 guys, they start piling on, man. They're just asking all kinds of questions, and he's being pelted with this stuff, right? All these questions about, and this is the same passage where another famous quote is, it says, someone who is completely overtaken with the material world, which he would call wealth, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than that person to find the kingdom of heaven. That quote's in there as well, okay? And so he's taking on a lot in this chapter. And in the middle of it, he's taking on, please allow the little children to come unto me. And so if we burrow down into the story of that, he is at a place where it says he is teaching and healing. And so whatever that means, he's making his presentation, he's probably touching people, he's probably in a spiritual way, probably giving them hope and insights, and he's touching their hearts, he's speaking to them. And there's a bunch of little kids there, and they want to come to him. And so the adults say, oh, no, get those kids back there. They're messy and sticky, and who knows what they've been doing. They got cotton candy and all this other stuff. Oh, they should not be in the presence of a great teacher. He said, no, let them come to me. And it talks about how he lays his hands on them, and he spends time there with them. It doesn't go into a lot of details. And so I want to read a quote to you today from a gentleman who is why do I get the people's names who just aren't Jack Smith? You know what I'm saying? But anyway, this gentleman is Oleg Sonder. I'm good so far. Oleksandr Berdichevsky. That's all that's it. I'm good. I hope you got that, okay? He is a Jungian scholar. And he talks about Jung's shadow work. And most of you have heard of it, the shadow. And I know that when I first heard of the shadow, I thought, well, this is that dark side of humanity, and Jung wants us to go there, right? But the shadow word has two pieces simultaneously. I should say meanings simultaneously. One part of it is the part of us that is so forgotten from our consciousness that it goes into a place within us that's called the shadow. The other part of it is that Jung's philosophy was that we generally access that when we are in the shadow. The two meanings. So this gentleman whose name I just gave you, he said Jung's shadow self theory is the unconscious, suppressed part of us that contains truths of us that, after being socialized, becomes largely unknown. And this aspect of us is largely, according to Jung, creative, intuitive, problem solving, and containing one's healthy self-esteem. Socialized. All the disciples, all the Pharisees, heavily socialized, heavily educated. You know, what we call esoteric. Esoteric, that's an interesting word. I remember looking that up. And esoteric means some wisdom that not very many people have. Some wisdom that you need tons of education to achieve. Carl Jung says, being esoteric socializes us away from who we once were, the child. I remember when I was in ministerial training and my teacher, we got into this whole thing in Matthew. And I remember growing up the way I heard it, you know, all those years exposed to Christianity, which is fine, but their teaching was, this shows what a great guy he was. Bring the sticky kids to me. I'll hang out with them, even though I'm brilliant. And I remember in this class, the minister who was running this class posed the question, you know, we think about what the children got from him. What did he get from the children? So, metaphorically and metaphysically, we see someone who's operating in an esoteric situation, all kinds of highbrow religious ideas being kicked around. Hey, what about this? What about this? What about this? What about this? You know, we get so complicated. We overthink everything. He says, oh, man, bring me the kids. You know what I'm saying? I got to get grounded, you know? When I worked for Solano County, I worked for Solano County for 20 years, and I had one of my bosses was someone that I loved him. He was an amazing man. And he was a tough person to work for, but I loved him, and I learned a lot from him. And he loved to tell people how much of an atheist he was. He was a devout atheist. And any of us who had any kind of spiritual inklings, because, you know, you get to know people in work environments, especially when you work in counseling and stuff, a lot of your own stuff kind of comes out. And so he would always give us such a hard time. Oh, you guys are superstitious. This is great, you know. And he was highly educated to do his job in the hard sciences, but also in hardcore psychology and psychotherapy and all of that. And so it was the material realm and what we have to work with, and if you can't see it, it doesn't exist, and things like that, right? And so he would give us a hard time. And so I was always aware of the fact that he had a very strong relationship with his father. He just loved his father. And they lived quite a distance from each other, but he would get over. His father lived in Sacramento, and he would get there as much as he could, probably twice a month, and they would spend time together. And his dad, they just had this really amazing relationship. And his father was a mechanic by trade. He was a great mechanic. And people even he got into some performance vehicle stuff. You know, he's really that way. And he loved to fish. And so I knew that my boss, his dad always had a boat. And so during the summer, they would probably spend at least one weekend a month on one of the Northern California lakes somewhere fishing. And when the children came and the grandchildren came, you know, That was what they did, and he loved it. So his father suddenly made his transition, and it was rather sudden. He was an older gentleman, but he made his transition. But I want to use the word for a moment, died, which is a word I don't believe in. But I want to use it for a moment because that's what my boss said, well, my father died. Oh, God, I'm so sorry. I'm so, I know you guys are so close. So he took about a week or two off, and in the midst of all that, I knew that there was a memorial, and it was going to be a big deal. So he came back, and at some point I went into his office, and first couple of days, and I said, hey, how did everything go? Are you okay? And he seemed to have kind of a bounce in his step a little bit, kind of, And he said, wow, I said, it was really amazing. He said, I was really kind of dreading this funeral, but then, everybody started putting some fishing stuff into the casket and all the notes that we wrote, and we put them in the casket, and it was just really great. And I go, say what? Mr. Atheist? I didn't say that, but I was thinking it. And so I said, really? I said, tell me about that. So yeah, I said, there were a couple fishing poles that were his favorite, and we made sure they went in with him, and then everybody wrote notes to him, how much we loved him, and and we were going to miss him and stuff. And there were some words in there about, the fishing places you will find. What? The fishing places you will find. Okay. So I asked him, I said, wow, I said, whose idea was that? Well, it was the kids, and it was the grandchildren. And they wanted to make sure he was okay. They wanted to send this with him. Send this with him. He left an atheist and came back a seeker. Why? Because when you look at Carl Jung's shadow work, he said there comes times in our lives where, because what we're going through, we are left with no option but to go to the shadow, where the truth lives. We just went through a holiday season where we celebrated metaphorically, metaphysically, the Christ, the birth of the Christ. Oh, this beautiful. Yes, this is us. This is the idea of us. This is the Christ. This is our beloved. This is our perfection. This is where we come from the stars, and now we go into the world with these great ideas and this direction forward and this great intention. This is the Christ. Now all of a sudden, Matthew chapter 19, it's more complicated. Everybody wants to tear the Christ down. In my career, I have been so blessed to have manifested, over the years I've worked, a lot of training around the inner child. It's really big in counseling, especially with substance use disorders. From the psychological standpoint, the psycho-spiritual. And I've been in some pretty secular trainings around the inner child. But because of my exposure to this teaching, I always go back to the Christ. I always go back to the higher self. Why is this so important in substance use issues? Is because it's a crisis. Because all of a sudden we're looking at our lives. All of a sudden we're doing something in recovery called inventory. Right? We're walking into the warehouse of our lives, and we're starting to look the shelves over, because maybe things ain't going so good. Carl Jung said that generally we return to the shadow when things are in crisis. And so bear in mind, and the reason I'm bringing this up around New Year's is because New Year's is a time when I think a lot of us take some stock in trade. A lot of us take inventory. New Year's has been incredibly important in my life in terms of taking a look back. I'm a big inventory person. Take a look back, see what's going on, what's working, what's not working, right? looking forward with intention. What do I need to change? What do I need to bring up? It's perfect time for shadow work, right? Because Carl Jung, now we're going to turn it over to him as a direct quote. Carl Jung says, your vision will become clear only when you look into your own heart. Those who look outside dream. Those who look inside awaken. I love that. That's exactly what's been laid out today, if you notice the theme. It's not out there somewhere. It's in here. It's in our shadow. We have the answers in here, but they have been socialized out of us. And so in this time of where we are at the first of the year, ourselves, personally, I think, socially, nationally, community, maybe it's time to take a look at the shadow and to remember who we are, to remember the truth that the little children, the archetype of the little children, are trying to show us, to make sure that Grandpa's okay wherever he's going. All right. Thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate it. So we are supposed to do some special music, but he just walked out the back door. So here he is. That's what you get for going to the bathroom. You know what I'm saying? Okay. So here is Dallas.